Hello, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Los Angeles County Asian American Employees Association's third Distinguished Speaker Series. My name is Joanna De La Cuesta, and I currently serve as the association's treasurer. LACAAEA's Distinguished Speaker Series is a monthly virtual event where we invite the movers and shakers in and outside of LA County leadership to share their compelling journey to encourage and inspire professional development and community advocacy. For this month, LACAAEA invited recently appointed Chief Deputy Director Ms. Akiko Tagawa to come share about her background, her career in county government, her thoughts and insights about being an AAPI woman in county leadership, and provide some insights about the rise of anti-Asian hate sentiments. But before we get started, I would like to first introduce tonight's moderator, Ms. Jodie Chen. She is currently LACAA's Public Information Officer and is a big contributor to the association, including taking the lead of establishing LACAA's bi-monthly newsletter and the enhancement of our association's social media and website. Jodi began her county career service as an intermediate clerk and promoted through numerous county departments, including Child Support Services Department, Department of Children and Family Services, Fire Department, and the Board of Supervisors. She has been with LA County for over 12 years and is currently a management secretary for the Internal Services Department. Prior to working with the county, Jodi worked in a wide range of professions for 20 years, including becoming an award winning graphic designer. She's a Southern California native after immigrating from Taiwan, an adventurous foodie, and enjoys trying out dishes from different cultures. Jodi continues to stay involved in the local community as a parent advocate for the special needs community. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce Jodie Chen.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Joanna. Hi, everyone. So we at LACAAEA has been striving for community service, career development, and connecting people. Our Distinguished Speaker Series is simply just that, helping the community and our membership to connect with others in LA County, as well as the county leadership. When I was asked to moderate this time for Akiko Tagawa, I was more than happy to do it because she's so cool. But we're also so thrilled to celebrate her promotion as the new Chief Deputy for the Department of Medical Examiner-Coroner. I'm so honored and really appreciate that she's willing to take time out of her evening to share her experiences with us and offer her thoughts and impart any wisdom that she is willing to offer. But before we begin, though, I'd like to remind everyone that we'll be recording this evening's session. Shortly after, we'll make it available on our YouTube channel, where you'll find other speakers that we've interviewed. We also like to ask everyone to kindly mute themselves so that we're free from any incoming audio distractions. And lastly, we will have a Q&A towards the end. Akiko has graciously agreed to answer any questions that you may have. So if a question pops up in your mind, please feel free to put your question in the chat box and we'll read through them before we end. So allow me to share her very impressive bio with you. As a new Chief Deputy, Akiko Tagawa has over 25 years of county experience, mostly associated with administrative and process improvement work. She started her county career in 1995 as an environmental health specialist, or also known as restaurant inspector. Her inquisitive mind and penchant for asking questions helped her develop many friendships and working relationships with the state, federal, and local government agencies, which helped her to develop a reputation of expertise in food safety, quality assurance regulations, and best practices. She also supported the implementation of restaurant grading system and helped establish the public relations program within environmental health. In order to hone her skills in community organizing and social marketing to better support the PR work she was doing at this time, Akiko returned to school, enrolling at UCLA in their Masters of Public Health program. During this time, the tragic incident of 9/11 occurred and significant emphasis was placed on emergency preparedness in public health. The new skills she gained from UCLA allowed her to join the organizational development and training team, where she helped create a cultural shift in public health employees' willingness to support a disaster response. Her administrative career has since evolved from legislative analysis and process improvement projects with the Substance Abuse Prevention and Control Program, management services for the probation department, and most recently as the acting deputy director of public health, where she was instrumental in supporting the expansion of the contact tracing program and implementation of the vaccination megapods during the COVID-19 pandemic response. The combined experience and knowledge over the past 25 years and being a strong change agent has allowed her this opportunity as the new chief deputy of the Department of Medical Examiner-Coroner's office. Let's briefly unmute ourselves to give Akiko a very warm welcome. Akiko?
Yes. Can you see me?
Okay, cool. Akiko, could you please tell us a little about yourself?
Sure. And thank you for having me today. It feels like I've come full circle, and I'll explain that in a little bit. But I'm third generation Japanese American, and have an interesting family dynamics because I have relatives that were interned during World War II. I also have relatives that moved to the East Coast and avoided being interned during World War II. I also have relatives that were in Hawaii and experienced Pearl Harbor during World War II. I had family members that actually fought for the United States. And I also have family who fought for Japan. So it's this very interesting dynamic of perspectives on the same war, which pretty much defines like how I've lived my life. I was brought up speaking both Japanese and English, and I actually went to two schools. Monday through Friday, I went to the regular, what I called American school, and went to a public school from first kindergarten to sixth grade. On Saturdays, I had an 8-hour Japanese school program, but it was aimed towards expat kids. So it was an academic program to keep kids kept up with the grades in Japan. So that was also rather interesting, I guess. So I experienced not fitting in American school, and I also experienced not fitting in Japanese school because I was either not Japanese enough or not American enough. And my school, American school, is relatively predominantly white, so that also shifted my perspectives on life. I went to a Catholic all-girls school where the nuns had protested against the archdiocese and separated from the church because of women's rights issues. So I had an extremely strong women's rights education in junior high and high school. Being that I'm Buddhist, it was an odd experience to be amongst a predominantly Catholic family environment. But, you know, it opened my eyes to different things. And then for college, both my undergraduate and graduate were in public school systems at Cal State Northridge and at UCLA. So that's kind of my upbringing. On a personal note, I like eating. I like cooking, and I like eating, and lots of eating, and lots of talking about eating and cooking. So that's a little bit about me.
Perfect fit for your previous job.
Yes.
What made you decide to come to work for LA County?
It wasn't that deep of a thought. I was looking for a job out of college. I thought it'd be easy to find a high-paying job in the Forbes 100 companies, environmental companies, and that didn't really work out. But actually, that's where my networking skills helped. In college, I had gotten an internship with the state of California, and it was coveted internship. And my employer liked me a lot and said, "Hey, Akiko, can you bring in someone um, who's like you that we could hire as a second student intern?" So my girlfriend, who was also my tutor at school, I told her about it and said, "Hey, there's this internship." So she came and worked at that internship. So when we graduated and I was struggling to find a job, she had heard about it, reached out to me and said, "Hey, Akiko, I'm applying for this job with environmental health. You know, we both qualify for the job. You should apply too." And we both applied and we both got into the same cohort and started together. So I feel like had I not had that opportunity to reach out to her and have these communications about, jobs, that option for me to apply would never have happened. But with it, I chose it because it was, it paid well for my early 20s. It had great benefits. You know, it seemed stable, and the best part was that I would have 3-day weekends every single week. And as somebody at 22 wanting to go skiing and camping on the weekends and hang out with my friends in Vegas, that seemed like the ideal job for me to have. So nothing that
Yeah.
exciting.
Yay for the benefits.
Yes.
Okay, so working in public health during the pandemic had huge set of challenges, and as a leader, it requires developing a level of trust. How have you learned about gaining the trust of others you work with?
This applies not just at work, but in your personal life, my personal life as well. And I think first thing is I try not to act like I know everything. I always come in asking a lot of questions, and I spend probably 80% of my time listening. And by doing so and asking guided questions, people tend to share a lot more than what you expect. And that starts to forge the relationship. And I try to be as transparent as I can be. I make sure my guard is down so they feel like I'm not coming after them for any reason. And that has worked really well. And that I'm really there to collectively as a team accomplish an objective, and that's like my mantra every single day. And that also resonates with people. So those are how I've tried to gain trust of others.
It's difficult, but yeah, those are great tips.
Yeah.
Working for the medical examiner seems like a significant shift in work responsibilities now. How have you adjusted? And are there any interesting highlights from your first few months?
So the emergency response work with the COVID pandemic had forced me into this day-to-day transition of like brand new activities that I had never done before. And these tasks that during a day-to-day operation would be considered completely um, unattainable. So I became extremely comfortable just talking to anybody and everybody who would listen to me. And if somebody had any idea, I would just grab to it until something came of it. And if it didn't, at least I tried that and I moved on to the next idea. But we went through those processes very quickly. So when the vaccine megapod project came up, I was brought into it probably about 2 weeks prior to the vaccine pods being launched. And I met with the fire department partners literally, I think I want to say like 10 days prior to the launch. And then we had the 10 days to get to know each other, figure out the mission, figure out where the locations were going to be, and then, open up these megapods in January. And so that trained me well when I got to the medical examiner, because I was still in kind of this emergency mode. So the same way I bridged the relationship with the fire department in a very short amount of time, I've tried to do the same with the management team in the medical examiner-coroner. And again, I go back to, I listened a lot, I ask a lot of questions, I assume I don't know anything. And I'll give you an example of assuming nothing. Acronyms exist in every single government agency, right? And it's your language. So people kept talking about NOK. And where I came from in environmental health, or anywhere else in public health, as far as I knew, NOK stood for not okay. But not okay didn't fit the conversations that were going on. And it seemed like a dumb question to not know, but I didn't know. So what I did is I said, hello, what is an okay? And it turned out to be next of kin, which is a completely different conversation from not okay, right? The decedent is not okay. No, we're looking for the next of kin of the decedent. So even at that level, I'm not shy at all about asking the simple questions and, getting over it quickly so that I can catch up to where everybody else is as quickly as I can. And by asking these questions, people realize, okay, well, one, this is the level of what she understands, and then two, okay, she wants to learn, so let's teach her. And then you just keep going through that cycle until your skill sets are up to where they need to be for the team. And so that's kind of the strategies I've used to adjust to and build the bridges, gain the trust by listening. And I listened to just about everybody, everybody from the drivers of the vehicles to the custodians, to the investigators, to the physicians. And at every single level, there's always some input that you get that like raises your awareness of the things going on in the office. So that's what I like to do. As far as highlights, I knew nothing about bodies prior to joining. So it has been an interesting thing. So kind of on the body side, I did not realize that rigor, when on TV, I would see bodies that are just kind of like firm. I thought that's how dead bodies were, but apparently that's only for the first 2 days or so. And as the body decomposes, it actually looks more like rubber, and the inside of the body slowly begins to liquefy. So it's that was something I was not aware of. So that's kind of on the gory side. On the more process side, I grew up watching CSI. I've watched probably every single episode of CSI, but now realize that CSI is not very close to reality at all. And that one CSI on that show is probably the work of 10 different experts that they've kind of truncated into a one person and a 50-minute show. And the work that one person does is probably about 6 weeks of work. So that was like a huge awareness for me that I didn't realize. The other part that those TV shows never really discuss is the importance of property. Where our medical examiner-coroner's office only receives decedents who have passed on unnaturally and before their time. So if they die of an illness, normally that's mitigated through the hospitals. But these are people who are either murdered, committed suicide, drug overdose, or just found dead somewhere. And then we also manage all of the passings of homeless people and veterans who don't have families. So that's like the specific group. And so when they're found and they're brought, their property, like their wallets, their jewelry, things like that have like blood on it. It might have like body parts on it. It sometimes smells bad. And we actually have people who painstakingly wipe and basically sanitize every piece of bill, every piece of jewelry, itemizes it, puts it nicely into a bag if it fits, or however, and they hold on to it until the decedent's next of kin comes and retrieves it. And the amount of care that these people put into that process was just such a emotional thing for me, because I didn't realize there's just so much effort to it, and that really made me feel like I'm really in the right place to work with good, nice people like that, and that are so caring, and make a difference to somebody's day, who's already having a bad day because somebody they love has passed on in a tragic way.
Wow.
So those are some of the highlights or interesting things that I think most people don't really realize about the
Mhm.
medical examiner. There's others, but I think those were like the three that I thought were most interesting.
Well, that is really interesting. And I really admire that you're willing to go back to school uh, to do forensic science so that you're better equipped, for this position and everything. So that's so awesome for you to do that. Um, so we now have a woman vice president in office and an Asian American for that matter. Many would say AAPI women has been successful in reaching their goal. Do you think that young women today are still fighting against the odds, or do you think they have equal opportunity today? How would you coach them on how to move ahead in life?
I've been thinking about this question a lot. Um, it's hard to answer because of my upbringing, I guess, where, because I had such a strong women's right education for junior high and high school, and the nuns protesting and cutting off financial ties with the archdiocese to continue their school is not some easy task, especially back in the 60s. So I actually never thought that I didn't have a chance to succeed. And so, a lot of it is then mindset. And even in elementary school, even though it was predominantly white, I always ran for class president. Had my little speech, and would be voted in. In hindsight, I realized everybody who volunteered could be president for like 3 weeks or whatever. So I always thought I could be president wherever. I grew up with Connie Chung on TV. She was the anchor, and so I've had role models all my life that never thought that there was some odd against me. And in fact, I thought the odds were higher. When I joined the county, I was like, wow, there's not as many Asian Americans moving up. I don't have any Asian American supervisors that I had. And I actually actively started looking for places to work that would have an Asian manager. And funny enough, public health is mostly women. Not well, it's not like everybody's women, but it's predominantly women. And so more than half is women. Maybe that's a better term, because I'm not sure of the statistics. So there's been female leadership, and that so it's that framework is there. And so what I would I guess if I were to coach someone who had feelings that because they're a woman, there's odds against them, that a lot of it is about the mindset of, how you approach it. And like being negative about it, I don't think ever helps anybody, get over the hurdles. And so, if you change that mindset and says, well, why not? And just keep moving, I feel like paths open up. And it might not be the path that you were thinking of, but it's paths do open. I never thought I'd be at the medical examiner court. I didn't. If you asked me 6 months ago, I wouldn't have thought I would be at the medical examiner court. It just happened to come up. So, just the paths are there. It's just a matter of, do you take those paths or not? I've actually also been extremely fortunate. Early on in my career, I was advised by one of my first bosses, Akiko, you have to have a brain trust of people you could go to, kind of like a bank account, but instead of cash, you actually have a file of people that you could call and contact on a regular basis to seek advice on next steps. And so I still keep in touch with that particular chief, who was my chief 25 years ago. And he's probably the best person to talk to about team building. He's a Hispanic male, so it's not Asian, but, and he will take the time, weekend, evenings, whenever, to talk to me about, well, maybe you should do it this way. Have you tried? And I would listen, and then things that he says resonate. So, I use that as my guide. And so having a significant brain trust, which has grown for me over the 25 years, is also helpful, but it's a give and take. So, I don't just call them for advice. We go out to lunch, we go out to dinner, we hang out. We don't talk shop all the time, but that relationship and keeping that relationship has helped to kind of guide me throughout the years. And they'll tell me if I'm being stupid, they'll tell me if I'm being too stubborn, they'll tell me if my path that I'm going down is wrong. And it's good to have people around you that you trust, that, can kind of give you that straight talk. So those might be things that I would share with my fellow female colleagues.
I love that. Find a mentor. How do you find work-life balance and balance time for yourself to unwind so that you're not feeling burned out?
So that comes back to my first comment about coming full circle with LACAAEA. Back when I was active, I was like a secretary, and that I was invited to join, and I wasn't quite sure, but I joined, and I was a member prior to that. But Wendy Watanabe, who was after that the auditor controller, was the president at the time. And, half the time, I was a punk, so I didn't necessarily listen to everything that was being advised to me. But I noticed that when we meet for these business meetings, obviously we took time to talk about, what to do with our next event, how we're going to handle it, what the newsletter is going to look like, scholarships, yada, yada. But she actually would take the time to just talk to me directly and tell me about her personal life, the things she's done with her husband, that she inadvertently ended up on a Food Network show because she was eating at the place that was being, filmed, these like fun things. And I thought, wow, if Wendy at her high level is capable of keeping this work-life balance, I should try to do the same, especially since I was way lower back then. and so I've actually made like this significant effort to make time for me. And I realized that the more time I made for me, and I took my rest and went on vacation, not excessively, but as needed. I'll take a day off on the weekend and will not look at my emails or my phones. And they know to call me if an emergency happens. But that really helps to to let the brain rest. And if your mind is rested and recharged when you start back up on Monday or Tuesday or whenever it is, that's your first day, there's you're refreshed, and so you see things with a new eye, and things that happened last week you could kind of revisit and think through. And I'm actually much more productive having that rest rather than trying to push through. And so that's one. My husband's also a life coach, so he actually, like, makes rules for the home about shutting the phone off, actually going off the grid completely without cell phones, and just like being mindful of the present moment that you have with the family members that you have. And to do that, and to always make sure that you've got your priorities straight. And that's different for everybody, but my priority is my parents, my husband, my dog, my sister. The immediate family is my priority. So I try very hard to make sure that that stays my priority, not my work. But I will, make sure my work is done, and I work harder than most people to make that happen. But once time comes, it's my time. I will. It's intentional, and you have to intentionally do it, because otherwise I would end up staying at the office till 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and it's easy to just forget that there's other things to do in life.
That's so awesome. I always have a hard time juggling that work-life balance, especially teleworking.
Yes, yes. Oh, yes, yes. Teleworking and emergency response make it very, very hard to that line blurs. And so on one hand, I am a proponent of telework, but for me personally, I prefer to go to the office so I could ceremoniously close my day at the office, and I say goodnight and then, go home and enjoy my dinner.
Say goodbye.
Yes.
Okay, so with the rise of the Asian American hate that's going on, how have you been dealing with it personally as an Asian American?
So I've dealt with it my entire life. My first experience of being told I'm different was when I was 5 in kindergarten. A little boy came up to me, looked at me. I didn't actually speak much English, even though I'm born here, because I was raised speaking Japanese. And he poured milk on my head and said, and I was like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm trying to make you more white." And I think he was trying to be helpful.
Oh
And
my.
so I was stinky the rest of the day because I smelled like rotting milk. And came home, my mom said, "What happened?" And I said, "This little boy threw milk at me." And she's like, "You have to show the Japanese spirit." And I recall on um, um, Bill's speaker series, he said the word gaman, which means to kind of persevere.
Mhm.
My parents were a little bit different. She said, "Do you have to show the Japanese spirit? You go get them." So I'd go to school the next day, get into fist fights with the other kids. Not that that's what I would encourage, especially in this day and age. But so I learned very young at 5, really, to fend for myself and not put up with that stuff. So that's where it started. But then I realized, well, it goes the other way too, because, in my Japanese school, or when I'd visit Japan, they wouldn't treat me like a Japanese person. And similar comments, but in an opposing way, would be, targeting me. And that took a long while for me to kind of come to grips with, because I really felt like I wasn't Japanese and I wasn't American ever. But actually going to my junior high and high school, with the nuns, they're like, it's really about, what you believe in. Are you brave and courageous enough to speak up, for what's right and stand up for it, is really what kind of like resonated with me in my high school, junior high school. And the women I went to school with, we are still extremely close to one another. So one way that I continue to deal with this hate that we see every day is to like talk to my girlfriends and see how they're dealing with it. And some are becoming more active politically to raise their voices. Some are turning to community work, and some are turning to supporting our younger generations to make sure that they learn civics, and that they can raise their voice and have that courage to speak up, and even if it's a minority voice. And minority not meaning like racial, but minority meaning an opinion that's not of a common agreement, I guess. And then like once I got into the workplace, yeah, I was fine. Well, there were issues even in my office, because when I first started, I was the only woman, even though now public health is predominantly women. So I was the first woman. I was super young looking, and the young looking has actually been much more of a problem for me than my race in LA. But when I started traveling with the FDA and the state to other parts of the state and the country, I would experience these like weird interactions where they've actually never seen an Asian person or interacted with an Asian person and have no clue what to say. And they would say horrific things that would be considered inappropriate and something that's someone would be disciplined for in LA, but in their community, it's not there yet. On one hand, it's great to be exposed to it because you realize how much better LA is compared to some of these other communities. But two, I also now, because it's been like part of my life, I can't pick a fight with every single person who has like issues with me. So then I try to figure out if their comments are intentionally mean and they're intentionally trying to put me down, or if it's unintentional, they're actually trying to be friendly, but they don't know any better. Yeah. And if they don't know any better, I try to take that moment to make it an educational moment. And rather than come off angry, I just kind of half jokingly talk about it, and then like have a little bit more serious conversation about, well, I don't think you should tell me that I have an accent on my English, because I don't. And what you're probably hearing is my West Coast, nuances. And perhaps had you closed your eyes, you wouldn't realize that I'm Asian. And then they kind of take a step back, but I really try very hard not to create this hostile environment, because I am always mindful that I might be the only Asian person, Asian woman that they'll ever talk to in their entire life. And if that's the case, I might as well try to make it a positive experience, so that, the next person who attempts to have these communications has it a little bit easier, but that first experience wasn't so bad that that second might be even better. So that's kind of and then if it is malicious, then I try to figure out, well, are they this way because they are marginalized themselves and have nowhere else to like target their anger towards? And if that's the case, I look at just culture methods really carefully and look at root cause. Well, why are they so angry? Why are they trying to target? And then having the open dialogue, asking lots of questions, listening tends to help. And it might sound like weird, but that's kind of how I've operated, and it's helped. And a lot of times, for me at least, it's been that I look too young, especially at work, that they don't want to listen to me, not because I'm Asian, but because I look too young. And that could be because I'm Asian, but, or that I'm, too short or whatever else, or too firm or too direct in the way I speak, that like freaks them out. And then they start reacting in different ways. So I don't know that it's always race based, so I really try very hard to have those conversations if I can. Now, if it's one of these like they're on their bicycle and they're just out to get you kind of things. That's not an institutional change that could happen. It's really about this random person. So those are harder, and I'm not really quite sure what to do about that, and have struggled myself with thinking through, well, what solutions would there be? And continue to have open dialogue with people to figure out what we could do about it. But the immediate things that are in my control, I really try hard to have
Mhm.
dialogue and communications.
Yeah, yeah. It's like the peace prayers, uh, yeah, pray for, I mean, do the things you can control and let go of the rest of it, or
Yeah.
pray for it and stuff. Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. Um, okay, so many of us in the AAPI community, and as a woman, would feel overwhelmed by the disadvantages of feeling the odds were stacked up against them. But you've gone to a place in a county leadership. How does one get over themselves? This is really my personal question. How does one get over themselves and know when to lead and when to speak up, when to refrain, and how to show your emotions appropriately?
So in college, at Cal State Northridge, I was part of this Asian American Student Alliance, and it was like a quasi political group of Asian Americans. And they had like a statewide student conference one summer that I went to, and that was the first time where my immediate like group, everybody was Asian American. And we got into breakout sessions like any other conference. And I still remember to this day the instructor saying, there's benefits to being Asian American, and there's benefits to the cultural nuances that you bring because of that upbringing. And his thing was, you need to use that to your advantage. And one example he brought up, which I still use to this day, and every time I use it, I think about him and smile, because I think he'll be very proud. He says, Asians are known to be quiet and soft spoken.
Mhm.
So it's okay, and let them think that. But if you're in a meeting or where decisions need to be made, you leverage the fact that you're normally quiet, and at the right moment speak up and speak your mind and be as articulate and as clear and holistic in your response as you can. And by doing so, that moment carries a lot more weight than somebody who talks throughout the entire meeting.
Mhm.
And I've carried that with me since college, and as I grow older in my career, I feel like it's even more important. So I don't actually, and this is intentional, say much in a meeting unless I'm facilitating and need to make sure others engage. If I'm like in a meeting and I'm part of a work group, I really don't say anything unless I feel like there are thoughts or opinions that have not been raised. And then if that's the case, I would raise it. And when to speak up, that's dependent on who you are. I tend to speak up more than most, whatever the race is. And I'm also very comfortable saying things that are not popular, saying things nobody else will say, and probably things that maybe I shouldn't have said, for my career. But because my priority isn't promoting up, and because my priority is my family and making sure I do the best job I can in that moment, that directs and drives like the comments I make. And so even if it's unpopular, and even if it like sometimes makes my managers and supervisors not happy, like, well, why'd you bring that up? We have to go back and replan. And I said, I don't mind doing the extra work on it, but that's a problem. But then I let it go. I don't put emotion into it. Because my thing is, if I say it, they listen, but as a group and a collective, we decide that, okay, we heard Akiko's comment, but we're still going to go ahead with it anyways. Even if the negative thing happens, you know, I feel pretty good that I've raised the issue. And, you know, as a collective, we've decided that that's okay. That's the risk we're going to take to move on. And then I'll just be part of the collective to make sure that whatever direction we head in happens. So, those are kind of the that's how I am. But you know, I'm usually told after a meeting, gosh, I wouldn't have said that, and I'm like, oh, okay. So I might not be the best person to be asking. So emotion wise, I really try never to show anger. You know, sometimes, yeah, my frustrations come out. That's the emotional leakage. And if I feel like I'm in a place where I can't control my emotions, I just stop and walk away. You know, if that means I have to walk the buildings a couple of times to calm down, if that means, you know, we hold off on discussing that till another day, if that means I don't send the email out that night, I will do that. Because younger in my career, I made those mistakes, and it's left, you know, they're mistakes. You can't do that, especially in this day and age when no one forgives you for the historic comments made. It's the best thing to do is to just stop. But I'm also very empathetic. So when people start crying, you know, I'll just cry with them and, you know, share their moment. And it's just, so the crying and the joys, I try very hard to share, but the anger and the negative energy, I really try hard to try to keep at bay. And that's something, you know, and a lot of the emotional intelligence courses and the emotional quotient, sometimes they're called emotional quotient classes, self-awareness, mindfulness classes, help with managing those emotions and the leakage that really isn't appropriate in the workplace. So that's like that. And I don't know if that helps. And then the leadership, I was part of this international society. Well, it's international now, but back then it was called the American Society for Quality. And it was a membership of quality control, quality assurance experts from all over the world. So I got a chance to work with like VP of quality control from NASA and Boeing and Pfizer and Bayer Pharmaceuticals, Nestle, and all these large companies. And when we would work together on projects, and these are all statistics and process improvement nerds, you know, we would work on these projects, and we would call each other member leaders. And that was like a new term back in the 90s. And I bring this up because I feel like every person at every level, you know, is a leader in their own right. And so they should feel very comfortable to speak up and lead as needed. But there's a difference between leading an idea and bossing people around or trying to force an idea on somebody. You know, those are very different conversations, but sometimes people blur it. And so, you know, how you manage that is also important. And for a little while, I used to do some food consulting on the side and would work with small businesses that turn into larger food chains. And what I've realized is that one of the most important people in the restaurant business are the dishwashers. And a lot of businesses forget that. Because the dishwasher actually sees every plate coming through the restaurant. So they know what dishes are not eaten, not taken home, you know, and if you and then how much food is actually being wasted. And if you start looking at it, you could start to say, well, maybe you should stop selling that item, because it seems like every other plate there's half of it left and it's being thrown out. And then we try to cost out like the the food waste. And you know, they start to say, wow, you're right. Yeah, I don't know why we kept it. You know, it seemed like, so they'd start changing their menus based on some of these observations. But those observations may not come unless conversations happen with the dishwasher, you know, in some instances. So in that sense, the dishwasher is a leader in that specific area, you know. And so it's really about empowering yourself, being confident in your own skin, being okay if people flat out tell you your idea sucks. You know, but still share your ideas. And if it's not taken, you know, be okay with it. At least you shared. Maybe the timing of it was wrong. So you keep it in the back of your mind, keep, you know, kind of developing the idea. Another boss comes, another office comes, you share again. And then one of these days, it might happen. So, you know, it's just one of those things where that's kind of how I feel about leadership.
Yeah, that's true. Not enough, I think. I think that the focus should be that every person counts in the organization, right? So I love the dishwasher, you know, illustration. Um, One of the things I remember when we were talking is that you had a really great tip, and I wanted you to talk about it a little bit. Was that you focused on also, you know, learning like how people do speeches, right? You really studied, you took these classes on your own, and just watch people speak, you know, and I think you had a great advice that I think we should all kind of, you know, do the same thing, like improve our speech, right? And you know, even when we go to interviews, we have to speak about ourselves, right? And so forth. So I actually started taking a Toastmasters, joining a Toastmasters. ISD have a Toastmasters group. And by the way, everybody, if you want to join, it's Tuesdays during lunch hour, and I can give you the announcements on that. But and it's really such a good program. But I wanted you to talk a little about like what kind of things you've done to study, you know, speaking and why it's important.
Yeah, it's so in college I took a speech class, and back then I was just definitely afraid of standing in front of people and speaking. Although I was a class clown, so I was okay being in the classroom amongst the students and making funny comments. So it was kind of this weird thing. But anyway, so I took the speech class. I got I think I got a B plus. And the teacher at the end said, "You didn't do that bad for an Asian girl." And I was extremely upset with this comment that this instructor made. And I actually filed a complaint against the school. Um, and just never got over it really. So, but what happened is, um, my second year at environmental health, I was asking so many questions about shellfish and seafood and this food and that food, that I actually knew more about food itself and the cooking process than most of my other colleagues. And I had more friends in the state and the FDA than most others. So I got pulled out of doing inspections and became a staff trainer, to do training for newly hired health inspectors, and also do refresher trainings for experienced inspectors who may not know something about a specific food product or process. And when I joined, and this person is also my mentor for life and like high on my brain trust. She kindly, you know, once I did my first training, kindly wrapped her arm around me and said, "Oh, Akiko, let's work on your attire, because I didn't know how to dress properly. And then she started inviting me to her Toastmasters classes. So that's where I started. And then I realized, oh my goodness, I don't know the first thing about developing an agenda, how to keep minutes. And that actual training came through becoming a board member of LACAAEA, because, you know, we take copious notes during the meeting. We have to plan agendas, have these conversations in meeting sessions, you know, gain consensus, go through, you know, all of those steps. And so that helped, in addition to the Toastmasters. And then from there, because of 9/11, I shifted gears. I actually went back to school to go work in Washington, D.C. as a food safety expert. And I was like, my dream was to make policy changes nationwide and remove equity problems with food laws, you know, so that Asian foods aren't treated differently from, you know, American foods and Hispanic foods, whatever it is. And so that was my goal. And that's why I went back to get my master's, because master's was required to get this job with the FDA in DC. But 9/11 happened, everything changed. And I ended up going into organizational development and training. And the Toastmasters turned into, well, Akiko, you should do some advanced, you know, training sessions. And so I went to these 3-day and 5-day sessions where it's almost like a one-on-one session with the instructor. They videotape your whole presentation, and then they play it back and then nitpick how your posture was wrong, your eye contact was wrong, your you know, how your hands are wrong, how you move and fidget is wrong, you're twitching here. And the more these people said it, the worse my presentations got, because I was so anxious. And then I realized during the graduation ceremonies that the people who did well sounded like the people on TV, you know, the infomercial people, like the Robert Kiyosaki's and these, like, you know, I'm the business guru and will help, you know, the people who really know how to sell an idea. And I'm like, wow, this is how they learned to do this. And it was like really a mind-blowing experience that I didn't realize that's the direction I was headed in. And then at that point, I decided, well, okay, I'm going to stop, because that's not who I am. And I don't think I want to be like the people on TV. You know, that's not genuine to me. And so what I try to do then is to take the parts that I liked from the presentation, try to make that for me. And then just try, you know, after years and years of trials and error, figure out, you know, what the best presentation style is that works for me, what the best interview skills work for me. Because at the end of the day, especially with an interview, the interview is as much about the interviewers liking you as it is about you liking the interview and you liking the potential employer that you're going to go work for. So I didn't want to change myself to the point where during an interview I was somebody else, and that was what I had to sustain for the next, you know, 5 years or whatever. So you know, I just decided I'm going to just stay who I am. I'm comfortable in my own skin. I'm okay if it doesn't happen, you know, but here I am.
Yeah.
And that's kind of that's like the approach I've taken with presentations. Now, the interesting thing, and this finger thing is something I've learned from my mother. And I didn't realize that this is what I learned from my mother until my niece, who's now 7, would like put her finger out and talk like this. And I was like, what is she doing? And then I realized my mom does the exact same thing. And my sister and I do the same thing. So there's things that just we've just been raised with. You know, so that's beside the point. But when I do presentations in Japanese, I'm for some reason not as poised. My voice cracks. And I have a much harder time presenting well. And I've not ever figured out why that would be. And it's just, I've never, it's an interesting thing, but my nerves are much more harder for me to control when the presentations are in Japanese. It's a fascinating. Like if I do karaoke, I prefer to sing in Japanese, and I'm comfortable. I have no nerve issues, but presentations in front of large groups of people, the Japanese,
In Japanese.
Versions. So even though I've gone through all these training, it didn't translate into me doing it in Japanese, which was rather interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, speaking of interesting, is there any interesting highlights as a food safety and restaurant inspector? I know you shared some stuff already, but anything you want to share?
It is the hardest job that anybody could do. Not as an inspector, but as somebody who works in a profession. You're standing all day. You're working with sharp objects. It's hot. You know, customers are complaining all the time. So as far as an industry, I have immense respect for people working in the food field, and the amount of, like, especially during COVID, you know, to survive, not having customers come, adapting to the changes, that's all just amazing to me, that the business itself did as well as they did. Under the circumstances. But let's see, anything interesting. I had, well, so the first time I went out to do a field inspection, I didn't actually know what I was doing. You know, I mean, I got hired for the 4-day work week. My role was environmental health specialist. So I thought I should be professional, wore a suit that I bought at Ross, and wore heels because I thought that's what you're supposed to do. And I went on this like site visit with a seasoned inspector. They saw me and they're like, and I was like, uh-oh. And because she didn't look anything like me. She was in slacks. She had like thick shoes on, you know, she had like comfortable shirt. I'm like, I'm not dressed like you. And she's like, it'll be okay. So we went, and sure enough, my heels got stuck in the rubber mats in the kitchen. And that was the last day I ever wore heels to work. And to this day, I don't wear high heels because you never know like what ladder you have to climb, you know, where you have to run to. Going to the hall is a trek, so flats is the way to go. So that's one. Two, the way to, there's so much culture, rich culture, but there's also, you know, language barriers that prevent communications from happening. And I think it was a really good experience for me as a young, you know, new worker to go through that experience. For instance, like if somebody doesn't understand what a rodent is, I would translate that to mouse. And if they didn't know what mouse was, and if it was Spanish, I would say ratones. And, you know, I try to learn it in as many languages as I can, but specifically with rodents, the one word that every language understood was Mickey Mouse. So if I'd say Mickey Mouse, they would say, oh, no, we don't have Mickey Mouse, you know. And you know, so there's these creative ways of trying to figure out what's fun, you know, that's not going to put people into this like defensive mode. And you know that those are kind of the things that I've learned. Yeah, I guess that I could tell. Well, did you want to hear about like the dirtiest kitchens or things like that? Is that,
Yeah.
So I actually so as an inspector, you're supposed to, you get a census tract. You get one census tract. So it could be like North Gardena, South Gardena. It could be the city of Monte. But your area of responsibility for both apartments and restaurants is that one census tract. And so you know, and then you do it in the order chronologically. The oldest the oldest restaurants, as far as like age, the ones that weren't inspected, you inspect next. So I went into this one restaurant. I was not going to do an inspection. I just needed to use the restroom really badly. And as a field inspector, it's really hard to find restrooms. Libraries are usually places we go, but sometimes, you know, so I went into this restaurant. I'm doing my business and I hear this like, and then I'm like, and then, you know, halfway through, I realized there's two rodents like running around in the restroom. So I quickly finish and I come out and I'm like, you've got rodents. And then they're like, what? I was like, you've got mice.
Emails.
And then they're like, no, we don't have any. And then they're like, you're not supposed to inspect us today. And I said, but you've got rodents. So we went, and so rodents don't have muscles in their butts. So kind of like birds when they fly and they just poop on your car, rodents as they run will put a trail of poop and urine as they go. So they're like just like letting go throughout the day. And it could be like, you know, up to 200 times that they're just like dribbling. They're incontinent. Maybe that's the best way to put it. So they're dribbling everywhere. So I went into the kitchen and there were droppings everywhere. And I looked at this tray because they were known for their fish fries. So they had these the crusts, or panko, I guess, breadcrumbs, and there's these like black things in there. And I said, are these rodent droppings? And they're like, what? And I was like, are these like mouse poop? And they're like, no, it's carob seeds, and carob seeds look like mouse droppings. And I'm like, I don't think these are, you know. And so then they're like, look, it's in the bag itself. So then I look, and it's in there mixed up. So then I pulled the bag up, and then there's a hole on the other side. So the crumbs are, you know, falling onto the ground, and the mouse had chewed into it and nested in there. And that's how it was mixed in with rodent dropping. And then the restaurant was just full of guests. And that was the first time I had closed a restaurant down with guests in it and had to ask the guests to stop eating.
Oh man.
Which we normally don't do, but because it's contaminated. And you know, for rodents, it's a minimum of a 2-day closure back in those days. So they were closed, but they had to be closed for a little while longer until they could do the rodent proofing.
Yeah.
And we have these things called the pencil test, where if you have any holes going to the outside that where a number 2 pencil can fit, that's big enough for a rodent to fit through. So they had to seal all that and, you know, clean. You would have to use like a black light. And if you shone a black light, you could see the trails of urine, like luminous. And so, you know, that's kind of how we figured out if it was clean or not. They had to throw everything out. And that was probably the most traumatic experience I've had, like as far as like, you know, me not even intending to do an inspection.
Yeah.
And the outcome it turned into
I'll
be.
say.
Yeah. I don't know if
man.
that's TMI, but
I think I'm gonna have some nightmares today.
yeah.
Okay, so we have one last question before we're gonna open it up to everybody. So I see one question. If anybody else has questions, please, by all means, put your questions up on the chat and we'll read it out. So the last question is, I know you're looking into retirement at some point. What would you like to do in retirement? Something fun.
Yeah, and I kind of go back to LACAAEA because I learned about retirement my first year on the job as a new employee, new member of LACAAEA. And they had these like retirement seminars, so I thought, oh, it's free, it's on a Saturday, and I'll go. And there were these veteran Asian Americans who were planning their retirement, and these people knew so much about money. I didn't know the first thing about saving money because that wasn't taught to me in my home. And they knew about interests. I didn't know what a Roth IRA was versus an IRA. They were talking about the horizons versus the savings, and how the strategies to save. And so in this 4 hours, my head just kind of like it was numb from so much information. But I had this like moment of panic that I didn't plan my retirement well. So I went back to one of the people who were in that meeting and said, can you help me set myself up? And they told me, well, first get off Plan E, because I had gone on to Plan E because of advice from my colleagues. And said, get into Plan D, buy back your time. And I think it was only like a year, so it was easier for me to buy back then. And then so I went to Plan D. And then they sat me down, and I'm like, I'm really stressed out. And then he started laughing, going, you've got like a long time to go, so you'll recover very quickly. So he calmed me down, and told me about maximizing my Roth IRA every year. Be frugal enough that you could pay into all of your accounts. Make sure you've got your 4% or whatever. Check in on that every 6 months to a year to make sure you're optimal with your percent. And he just kind of like really took me under his wing. He didn't have to, but I asked, and because I asked, he decided, okay. So we did this over several sessions, but that helped me to kind of be as ready as I can be for retirement. So, which is also a very, as far as being in your own skin and saying what you want to say without being offensive, I'm it's you feel pretty powerful when you're okay. And if I want to leave, I can leave. If I want to stay, I can stay, but I'm not like in this position where I have to be here for another 5 years, because that planning and strategizing has been done already. And so with it, once I retire, I don't know. I actually thought that I would become like a full-time food consultant, because I do like the food business. But with COVID and my priorities really shifting to my parents, I'll probably spend most of my retirement making sure my parents' last years are good, and that'll make me happy. I'll probably travel a little bit, and as I do that, other things might come up. And thanks to the pandemic, I've created a lot of social networks through social media. And so I have friends now in Europe and in other parts of America, Canada, South America. So I thought it would be fun if I could go travel and meet with them and, do the things together that we were doing virtually, but in person. And so that I thought would be fun. But, I'm kind of in a, if I was asked 3 months ago, I think I would have been much better about saying what I was going to do. But now that I don't know, it's an interesting, and I'm enjoying my job, so I may end up not retiring for a long while. So it's one of those, I'm just kind of go, yeah.
You gotta make that forensic science education or something.
Maybe I'll go into forensic science consulting. Who knows? But there's two things that my husband and I want to do, which is to do a road trip across country with our dog and try out barbecue places throughout the country. And, you know, there's differences in barbecues and styles of barbecue and sauces. So we thought that might be a fun thing to do, you know, once the country settles down and, you know,
Yeah.
things happen. Yeah.
Yeah. And thanks for the good reminder. I think we probably at LACAAEA should have a, you know, a financial one-on-one kind of class, you know, or training to help those that don't know about Roth IRAs and saving for your future and things like that. So
Yeah.
on top
I
of what we're getting in from the county, you know.
I would say 80% of my guidance for retirement has come from my fellow colleagues at LACAAEA. And so, you know, some have been colleagues, some are subordinates, some are supervisors. A lot are supervisors who were themselves gearing up, and they would share with me, oh, I wish I had done this. I wish you may want to look into this because I didn't look into it. Those are all like great things. And it really comes back down to asking the questions, even knowing that they may not share, at least you ask. And if you do ask, sometimes they'll actually share more than you ever thought or wanted to know.
Yep.
And it might be like too much, but it's really, you know, for my career, having the relationship with LACAAEA has been significant in terms of, you know, the support and, you know, having like people with similar challenges and hurdles and being able to talk through it, and then seeing other people do well and hoping to be there one day, whatever that there is. So it's really come full circle where, you know, I started and now I'm here with you on the other side of the camera. Yeah.
Thank you for that promotion. That's awesome.
It's,
Yeah, and
I'm
which
not
is
paid
why I joined. Okay, so we're gonna go to, I think it was Dara that had a question. Okay, what professional setback did you experience that actually helped you build resiliency?
um I apply for a lot of positions I know I'm not going to get. And well, especially younger in my career. And I did it knowing that I'm not going to be on the list, you know, and that they were going to send me a letter saying, thank you, but no, thank you. You don't qualify. Um, and that gave me a really thick skin, and I got very comfortable. I don't know if you call it a setback, but it made me very comfortable as far as being told no, thank you. But I did that so that when that came, you know, you have the right as an employee to go talk to the HR person and say, what was I lacking? You know, what was I missing? Sometimes they would tell you that it's the way you wrote the application answer that
Mm.
didn't meet um, the position. Sometimes it's that the language I used wasn't clear to the analyst reviewing the exam. And, you know, that's how I learned that the analysts who review the exams don't necessarily know the nuances of the position you're applying for. And so those, and then I also realized, okay, I'm lacking these skills. So I'll need to build up those skill sets, you know, whether it's presentation skills, whether it's coaching skills, whether it's supervision skills. And actually, I became kind of an association junkie in my 30s, late 20s and 30s, where I was probably part of 5 different professional associations, including LACAAEA, and I was on the board on all of them. And the reason why I did that is most of the jobs that I wanted to, the next step up from being an inspector to the next level to supervise, for some reason there was this requirement that you had to have supervision experience. But I didn't know how you get supervision experience if you don't get to a supervisor level to supervise. So The only out that I could figure out was, okay, so if I joined the associations and was a board member, leading a group of people who were there not paid, and coordinate an effort and say that I was able to do this with these volunteers, that even though I didn't have the actual supervision skill, it would at least, during the selection interview, give me some, additional things to talk about. And so, I did that. So the setbacks I embrace, and I don't actually consider failures or setbacks as negative things, but it really says, okay, so I don't have this. And so I used to keep these binders of uh, all of my resumes, the notes I got from my rejection letters, and then I would build my resumes based on the rejection letters. So the next time I applied, my chances were better. But that's a lot of work that most people don't put in.
Yeah.
I was just methodical about it, and so, so that was supervision. Okay, so then my emotional quotient. So then I started focusing on my emotional quotient awareness, the language used for that. Now it's about just culture and equity. So I've had to learn more about that. It's so at each step of the way, I've like kind of gained more based on some of the things that happen. So it's, I don't know, I just pick myself up and, keep at it. And I don't know if that answered Dara's question, but please please offer follow-up questions if that didn't hit the target.
I think so.
Okay.
Okay, one more question. With all the knowledge you have gathered over the years, what kind of advice would you give your younger self?
That's actually interesting because that was my journaling homework this weekend. And the answer I gave was, you do you. Make the same mistakes you've made. Learn from the mistakes, because every mistake, every decision you made is what makes you who you are and where you are today. So if anything changed in that past, I won't be where I am today, I don't think. And so that's one. But two, I would probably say, don't be a punk. Be appreciative when your mentors and, people ahead of you give you sage advice. I do listen, and I don't know if some some of you can relate. It's sometimes hard when you have unsolicited guidance coming, but they usually come from a really good place in that person's heart. And I think if I were to give myself an advice, that would be, be more open younger on in your career, and life, and try to listen more, and appreciate those guidances, because looking back now, every guidance and that I've been given by the people around me is what built me up to where I am today. And I think that's probably the most important, especially as a young person. I just remember thinking I knew everything, and I obviously didn't know anything. Now looking back, right? And so just being humble about that, and just absorb as much as you can, I think would be the advice.
Thank you. We might have time for one more question if somebody wants to bravely, turn on their video and their mic to ask it. Anybody can think of something? Okay. Well, we really appreciate this time. You've given us a wealth of advice and information that I think we can ponder on and and use in our journey here, in our career development and so in life, So really appreciate your time, and thank you so much. Akiko will be in one of our, I think the next newsletter that we roll out. So stay tuned for that. We have a newly designed website, so we hope that you guys can all, it's our initials LACAEA.com. Please enjoy it. Our information, and this evening's time will also be shared on YouTube. So along with other things that I think you guys might want to check out too. So again, thank you, Akiko, and really appreciate your time. And yeah.
Thank
Look
you so
forward
much for this time. I enjoyed myself.
Yeah. All right. Thanks,
Okay.
everybody.
Take care.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.